3 women arrived in a snowbound mountain town. 2 of them came as brides, 1 came as a hunter. Within 48 hours, 1 was dead in the snow, still wearing her wedding dress. The killer was someone in that town, someone people greeted by name every morning, someone who had buried his past so perfectly, not a single soul suspected a thing, except Ruby, because Ruby had seen his work before, 15 years ago, on her sister's throat. The storm had locked every door. There was nowhere to run, and the killer knew it, too. Welcome to Frontier Hearts, a channel built for those who love the rugged beauty of the Old West and the deeper stories underneath, of love, loss, mothers and children, and the stubborn, aching compassion that holds us all together. The most powerful thing you can do after evil tries to break you is build something beautiful anyway. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Share it with a friend who loves the West, and drop a comment. I read every single one.
48 hours earlier, the stagecoach had rolled in, racing the blizzard. Ruby Catherine Vale stepped out onto the frozen ground and felt the wind push at her, trying to shove her right back in the coach. Back to wherever she came from. Back to any place on Earth that wasn't here. She planted her feet firm and leaned right into it. The wool coat she had on was a good one, something she bought in Denver 3 weeks back with the very last of her travel money. Her boots were even better, broken in just right over 10 long years of walking down roads that never seemed to have an end. And the scar on her right palm, which you could see even through her glove when she grabbed the coach door. That was the oldest part of her. She was a tall woman, standing 5 foot 8 inches of lean muscle and bone that had seen too many hard miles. Her hair was a dark auburn color, pulled back tight from her face with lighter streaks where the sun had gotten to it. Her eyes, a gray-green shade like winter ice sitting on top of deep water, didn't miss a single thing. Not the way the driver was watching her with a look that was somewhere between curious and worried. Not the little group of folks gathered outside the general store, their faces all turned toward the coach with the kind of hungry look people get when they've been snowed in for way too long. And not the man standing off by himself near the saloon, broad-shouldered and real still, who took one look at her and then looked away. That had to be Finn Carroll. It just had to be. The letter she got had described him well enough. A rancher, a widower, a man who mostly kept to himself and liked it that way. A man who supposedly wanted a wife but had never bothered to say so himself. Ruby grabbed her traveling bag, ignoring the driver's half-hearted offer to help, and started walking toward the church at the end of the street. Her breath puffed out in little white clouds. The temperature was dropping, and dropping fast. The blizzard that the driver had been cussing about for the last 20 miles was almost on top of them. She could smell it in the air, could taste the sharp metallic bite of it in the back of her throat. They had maybe 2 hours before the snow really started coming down, maybe even less. The church door was standing wide open, and warm air and lamplight spilled out into the growing twilight. Ruby stepped inside and saw Minister Jacob Brenner lighting candles up at the altar, his hands moving slow and careful. He turned when he heard her boots on the wooden floor. "Good evening." His voice was quiet, gentle, the kind of voice a man gets after learning to speak softly around a lot of grief. "I need to get married right away." Ruby set her bag on the floor and pulled off her gloves. "Where can I find Finn Carroll?" The minister blinked, his face all lined and worn like old leather, and he just looked confused. "I am sorry, miss, but I do not believe I understand. Were you expected? I am Ruby Vale. I came because of a letter sent 6 months ago. The letter was signed by an F. Carroll, and it asked for a bride from the New York matrimonial service. I have come 3,000 miles, so yes, I am expected." Brenner opened his mouth to say something, but the words just never came out. The church door flew open again, and a blast of cold wind rushed in, bringing with it snow and noise and a young woman who stumbled inside, her arms loaded down with packages and her face all lit up with excitement. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, shaking the snow out of her blonde hair with a laugh. "I thought I was going to freeze solid before I got here." "Is he?" Her voice just faded away. Her blue eyes landed on Ruby standing there by the altar. Her big smile drooped into something unsure. "Oh, hello." Ruby sized her up. She was in her early 20s, small, barely 5 feet tall, and pretty in that soft kind of way that men always seem to like. The kind of girl who makes a man feel protective, who makes strong men want to build a wall around her to keep the big bad world out. She was everything Ruby was not, and everything she had never been. The girl set down her packages and dug a folded letter out of her coat pocket. Her hands were shaking a little as she opened it up. It wasn't from the cold, it was nerves. "I am Alice Drummond." She held that letter up like it was proof of who she was. "I am here to marry Finn Carroll. I have his letter right here. It is dated 4 months ago, and it came through the Helena Marriage Bureau. It promises—" She stopped and glanced at Ruby again. "It promises a good home and a new start." A deep silence filled the church, heavy like rising water. Minister Brenner looked from one woman to the other, his face changing from confused to something that looked a lot like horror. "Ladies, I believe there has been a very terrible mistake." The door opened a third time. More snow swirled inside, and with it came the man Ruby had seen outside the saloon. Finn Carroll stepped into the lamplight and just stopped. His eyes, a sharp hazel color under dark eyebrows, moved from Ruby to Alice and then back to Ruby again. He took off his hat and held it in both his hands. "I never wrote any letters." His voice was low and gravelly, like he didn't use it much. "My brother Luke sent those before he passed. He was always sticking his nose in things that were none of his business." Alice made a little noise, something between a gasp and a sob. "But the letter promised. My brother made a lot of promises he couldn't keep." Finn looked at her, and for just a second the hard look on his face softened a little bit. "I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing." "For nothing." Alice repeated the words like she was trying to figure out how heavy they were. 3 months of travel. Everything I had in the world sold off to pay for the trip. I even gave my mother's wedding ring to the coach driver as the final payment because my money ran out in Denver. For nothing. Ruby watched the poor girl's face just fall apart. She watched the hope drain right out of her like water spilling from a busted cup. She felt a little bit of sympathy, the kind you feel for a stranger's trouble when your own is buried too deep to share. But sympathy wasn't going to help Alice Drummond now. Nothing was. "What about you?" The question came from Finn, aimed right at Ruby. His eyes met hers and stayed there. "What about me?" Ruby kept her voice flat, with no emotion in it at all. "Why are you here?" "For the same reason she is. Somebody put your name on a letter. Somebody promised me a home if I came. So I came. 6 months ago." "Yes." Finn was quiet for a good long while. When he finally spoke, his voice had a harder edge to it. "I buried my brother 3 months ago. Whatever letters he sent, they were all lies. I am not looking for a wife. I never was." "Then you have got yourself a problem." Ruby picked up her bag. "Because 2 women just crossed half the country thinking they were going to marry you. And there is a blizzard moving in that's going to trap every last one of us here for at least 2 weeks. So you can stand there and say it's not your fault all you want, but that does not change a single thing." The wind howled outside like it was agreeing with every word she said. Alice wiped her eyes and squared her shoulders. You could see it took a real effort. "Minister Brenner, is there a boarding house in this town?" "There is. Beatrice Cotton runs a good, respectable place 2 streets over. I will walk you there myself, thank you." Alice gathered up her packages, making sure not to even look at Finn again. To Ruby, she said in a quiet voice, "I am sorry if I made trouble. I did not know about you. You did not cause a thing." Ruby's tone softened just a little. "Neither one of us did." After they were gone, Ruby and Finn stood all alone in the church. The silence between them felt tight, like a wire stretched to its breaking point. Somebody sent those letters on purpose. Ruby spoke up first because waiting on him to talk seemed like a waste of time. Somebody used your name and your brother's death to get 2 women out here. The real question is, why? Finn put his hat back on and tugged the brim down low. I am not sure what is happening, but I aim to find out. He walked toward the door and stopped, placing his hand on the frame. You are welcome to stay at my ranch if you need a place to hole up. There's an old guest cabin. It ain't much, but it is warm and a sight easier to defend. With things being what they are, having you close by might be a whole lot smarter than leaving you in town. Safer from what? From whoever is treating people's lives like a game. Ruby mulled it over. She studied the hard angles of his face and the way he carried himself, like a man who always saw trouble coming and was ready for it. She thought about how somebody had gone to a whole lot of trouble to get her here, and that kind of effort was usually just the start of something worse. All right, I will take you up on that. They left the church together, walking out into a wind that had a real bite to it, into snow that had begun to fall for real. The blizzard was upon them. Behind them, bathed in the warm flicker of candlelight, the church sat empty and waiting. In less than a day, it would hold a body. In less than a week, it would hold 3 more. But right then, in that short moment before all the dying began, there was only the storm and 2 strangers heading into it side by side, neither one of them having a clue just how much blood was going to stain the snow before the spring thaw. The next morning was born pale and cold. Ruby woke up in the spare cabin on Finn's land. She listened to the howl of the wind and knew, without even looking, that the world outside had gone completely white overnight. The blizzard had rolled in with a vengeance, just like the driver said it would. The snow was coming down so thick it wiped out the horizon, making the day look like dusk, burying fences and roads and anything else that could not stand up against it. She got dressed in a hurry in the biting cold air, pulled on her boots, and wrapped her scarf up tight. The main house was a good 50 yards across the open field. She could hardly make it out through the swirling snow, but she had seen worse during the war, tending to wounded men in tents that leaked and froze. She would get through this just fine. The door to Finn's house swung open before she got to it. He was standing there in the doorway, already dressed, with a coffee cup in his hand. This storm is a bad one. His breath turned to a white cloud. Nothing is going anywhere today. Probably not tomorrow either. Ruby stepped inside, thankful for the heat. Heard anything from town? Not a thing. The roads are completely blocked. He poured her a cup of coffee without asking and handed it to her. His sister Grace ought to be here before long. She lives closer, only about 2 miles out. If she made it through the night, she will be here. They waited, sipping coffee in the quiet. Outside, the whole world vanished into a sea of white. Grace showed up an hour later, materializing from the storm like an apparition. She was 30, with dark hair like her brother, the same hazel eyes, and that same habit of going perfectly still when she was mad. And right then she looked downright furious. There is a girl dead in town. Her words hit the quiet room like rocks tossed in a still pond. Finn set his coffee cup down, slow and steady. What girl? The blonde one. The one that arrived yesterday. Alice. They found her about an hour ago at the edge of town. Sheriff Garrison said somebody slit her throat. Ruby felt the news sink deep into her bones. She felt that old, familiar chill creep in, the kind that always came with a sudden passing, the kind she had known 100 times in the war and 100 times since. But this felt different. This was not some soldier succumbing to his wounds. This was plain and simple murder. Where did they find her? Finn's voice was even, but Ruby saw his hands ball up into fists. Near the entrance to the old mine. Grace's anger finally broke, letting the grief show through. She was wearing a wedding dress, the one from the general store. She must have been trying it on. Somebody killed her and just left her there in the snow. The wedding dress. Ruby remembered seeing it in the store window just yesterday, white satin with pearl buttons. Alice had been standing outside, just staring at it for the longest time. Her face was full of hope, Someone had promised her a wedding. Instead, they had given her a dress instead of a husband and a blade instead of a ring. I need to see the body. Ruby stood up and put her coffee down. Grace looked at her, her eyes sharp. Why? Because I am a nurse. I worked in field hospitals during the war. I know what wounds are supposed to look like. I can tell you things the sheriff might not catch. Finn watched her, his face a mask she could not read. Then we all go together. Outside, a small crowd had formed on the street, even with the bitter cold. The townspeople were drawn together by the news of a death. Ruby's eyes swept over their faces as she walked toward her horse. Most of them looked shocked and sad the way you would expect. But one man stood off by himself. He was tall, with graying hair, maybe 55 years old, and had a certain polished look about him, the kind that came from books instead of ranch work. He wore a fine gentleman's coat that was well taken care of, and he held himself with a deliberate stillness while everyone else was huddled up, whispering and guessing what happened. This man was just watching. His gaze moved from the church to the crowd, taking it all in with the cool curiosity of someone studying a bug in a jar instead of mourning a tragedy. Ruby felt that familiar prickle of her intuition. Something about him was off, too restrained, too watchful. "Who is that?" she asked Finn under her breath, as they swung up onto their horses. Finn's eyes followed her look. "That is Warren Hayes, the town's assayer. He set up shop 3, maybe 4 years ago. Mostly keeps to himself. Folks say he is honest in his dealings. Why do you ask?" "Just curious." But as they rode on toward town, Ruby glanced over her shoulder. Hayes was still standing right where he was, watching them go. When their eyes met across the snowy distance, his expression never flickered. He did not nod, did not look guilty, just kept up that steady gaze. Then he turned and walked away, his stride smooth even in the deep snow. Ruby filed the picture away in her mind. She had been hunting ghosts for 10 years. She had trained herself to remember faces, little habits, the small signs that mark the difference between an innocent man and a dangerous one. Hayes could be nothing, just another man with a past in a town full of them. Or he could be exactly the person she had come all this way to find. The ride into town took twice the time it should have. The horses had to fight for every step, pushing through snowdrifts that came clear up to their chests. Because I am a nurse, I worked in field hospitals during the war. I know what wounds are supposed to look like. I can tell you things the sheriff might not catch. Finn watched her, his face a mask she could not read. Then we all go together. The ride into town took twice the time it should have. The horses had to fight for every step, pushing through snowdrifts that came clear up to their chests. The wind felt like it was trying to shove them backward the whole way. By the time they finally made it to Tinup, Ruby's face was numb, and her hands ached with cold even inside her gloves. Sheriff Hal Garrison met them just outside the church, where they had brought the body. He was 60, with gray hair and a gray beard, and one of those faces that looked like it had been carved out of oak by decades on the frontier. His badge glinted in the dim light when he turned. "Finn, Miss Vale." He gave them both a nod. "I figured you would be coming. Can I see her?" Ruby's question was blunt. "I have medical training. 10 years as a field nurse. If that wound has a story to tell, I will find it." Garrison thought it over for a moment, then moved to the side. "She is in the back room. I'm telling you now, it is not a pretty sight. Death never is." The back room of the church was as cold as a tomb. Alice Drummond was laid out on a wooden table with a white sheet draped over her. Ruby drew it back, making herself look with a professional's eye, to see a body that held clues, not a dead girl. The cut across her throat was clean as a whistle, one deep slice from left to right. The killer was right-handed and had been standing behind her. There were no hesitation marks, no defensive wounds on her hands or arms. She never fought back. Ruby leaned in, studying the edges of the cut. It was too clean for a common hunting knife, too exact. This was done with something incredibly sharp, maybe a straight razor or a surgeon's scalpel. She looked at the girl's hands next. Her fingernails were clean, with no skin underneath them. No sign she had scratched her attacker. The wedding dress was ripped near the bottom, with mud staining the white fabric. She was running from something right before she died. Ruby straightened up, pulled the sheet back over that pale, still face. Garrison was watching from the doorway. What can you tell me? Whoever did this was an expert. This was not some fit of rage. This was an execution, plain and simple. He came up behind her. One quick cut, very professional. She was running just before it happened. You can see it from the mud on her dress and the scuffs on her boots. She knew someone was chasing her. Any idea who? Ruby shook her head. But I will tell you this much. The person who did it has killed before, most likely a good many times. This is not the work of some angry drunk or a jealous boyfriend. This is somebody who has had practice. Finn spoke from behind her. We need to figure out why she was at that mine entrance, why she was out there by herself, and why in the world she put on that dress. Garrison took out a small notebook and flipped it open. According to Beatrice Cotton, Alice was asking around yesterday afternoon about old miners, especially about Confederate veterans who moved here after the war. A cold dread washed over Ruby. What did you just say? The sheriff said it again, slower this time. She was asking about Confederate soldiers. Did she mention any by name? 3 of them. Minister Brenner, even though he was never a soldier. Dr. Mercer, who was a surgeon in the Army, and a prospector by the name of Silas Marsh, who died in a mine collapse 2 years back. Silas Marsh. Ruby made herself keep breathing steadily. How did he die? A cave-in. They never got the body out. They sealed up that whole shaft, said it was too risky to go back in. Where is that shaft? Near the north entrance. Why do you ask? Because whoever killed Alice knew she was asking questions. They knew she was getting close to something, and they put a stop to it before she could find what she was looking for. Find what? Garrison's patience was wearing thin. Ruby looked him straight in the eye. The truth. All the secrets. Night came on fast in the mountains. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the sky had already gone from white to gray to black. Finn guided Ruby back to his ranch through the pitch-black night. Their horses carefully navigated the snow, which fell without any sign of letting up. Grace had remained in town to help prepare Alice's body for burial. The ground was frozen hard as a rock, making digging impossible. They would have to store the body in the church cellar until the spring thaw, when the earth would finally be soft enough to accept her. That would be 3 months at least, maybe even 4. Alice Drummond was going to spend the winter in darkness, waiting for a final resting place she would never know. Back at the ranch house, Finn stoked the fire while Ruby stood by the window watching the snow come down. Her mind kept replaying everything she had witnessed. The clean cut, the absence of a fight, the wedding dress, and the talk about Confederate veterans. You are holding something back. Finn's voice came from right behind her. She turned around. He was standing near the fire, his face half hidden in the shadows. No, I am not. Why is that? Because I have not decided who I can trust yet. He took that in without a change in his expression. Fair enough. But if someone in this town is responsible for that girl's death, and you have an idea why, then your secrets could get you killed too. Ruby moved toward the fireplace, stretching her hands out to the warmth. The firelight caught the scar on her right palm, making it glow white against her skin. I came here searching for a man, someone who murdered people I cared about. The letter I got, the one that had your name on it, used a phrase that only he would ever use. The mountains remember blood. That is what was written at the very bottom. Finn just watched her, and only one person ever said those words. His name is Victor Drummond. He was an officer for the Confederacy during the war. He was in charge of a prison camp where they tortured Union soldiers. After the war ended, he simply vanished. I have been hunting him for 10 years now. Why? Because he killed my sister." The words came out without any feeling, hollowed out from use. Ruby had said them so many times they no longer carried any weight, but the memory they held was still sharp as a knife. Catherine, just 22 years old, laughing inside a hospital tent. Catherine trying to help prisoners break out. Catherine, discovered 3 days later with her throat cut, the same precise wound that had killed Alice Drummond. This Victor. Finn's voice pulled her from the memory. "You believe he is here? I believe someone here either knows where he is or is him. That letter was just bait. Somebody wanted me to come here. It might have been Victor himself, or it could be someone who wants him found just as much as I do." "And Alice?" Ruby turned to look him straight in the eye. Alice Drummond was Victor's own daughter. A heavy silence filled the room after she spoke. "How can you be so sure?" Finn's voice had dropped to a quiet whisper. "I found a photograph among her things when we went through her room at the boarding house. It was a picture of a little girl with an older man. His face was all scratched out, but the writing on the back said, 'To my dearest Alice, from Father.' And I knew that handwriting. I have seen it on enough captured documents to never forget it. So Victor lured his own daughter here, and then he killed her. I do not know the reason yet, but I'm going to find it out." Finn stayed quiet for a long while, just staring deep into the flames. When he finally spoke, his words were slow and measured. "My brother, Luke, he did not die from natural causes. He was murdered 3 months ago. Same way, clean and professional." Ruby could feel the different parts of the puzzle starting to connect. Did the sheriff look into it? Garrison called it a robbery that went bad. Luke was known to gamble and to carry cash he could not really afford to lose. But something about it just felt wrong, something the sheriff seemed to be avoiding. "What made you think so?" "Luke was found not far from the old mine entrance, the very same spot where Alice died. And just before he died, he told me he had discovered something. Something he said would change everything." "What was it?" Finn paused for a moment, then he made up his mind. "Come with me." They stepped out into the blizzard and walked across the yard to a second cabin that Ruby had not seen before. It was dark and quiet, with its windows all boarded up. Finn turned the key in the lock, lit a lantern, and went inside. The smell was the first thing to hit Ruby, the cold, preserved scent of death. Then she saw him. The body was lying on a makeshift table in the middle of the room. A man, maybe 50 years old, frozen completely solid, his face preserved by the mountain air. He was dressed in clothes that had once been nice but were now stained and ripped. And running across his throat, just barely visible in the lantern's glow, was a thin white scar. It was not a fresh cut. This one was old, long since healed over. "Who is this man?" Ruby's voice was steady, even as she looked at the horror before her. "The papers in his pocket say he is Silas Marsh, the prospector who everyone thought died in a mine collapse 2 years back. Supposedly, I found him 3 months ago, hidden down in a ravine on my land. Luke must have stumbled upon him first. He must have confronted whoever hid him there, and that person killed Luke to keep him from talking." Ruby stepped closer, studying the body with a professional's eye. She looked for other injuries, for any clue as to how he really died. That is when she found them, old scars across his back, the marks from a whip, the kind that Confederate guards left on Union prisoners. This man was not Silas Marsh. He was one of Victor's victims. A man who survived the prison camp came out west for a new start, and Victor tracked him down. "Are you sure about that?" Ruby rolled back the dead man's sleeve and found exactly what she was looking for. A tattoo on the inside of his wrist. It was his unit number, Union Army, 3rd Infantry. I am absolutely sure. This was a soldier, and Victor killed him, stole his name, and then disappeared into those mines. When this man's body turned up, it threatened to expose his whole secret. So Victor had to get rid of anyone who saw it, and that included Luke, including Luke. They stood there together in the freezing cabin, staring at the dead man who had held his secrets right up to the end. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the truth was finally coming together from all the pieces Ruby had collected for 10 long years. Finn was the first to speak. If Victor is here, if he has been here this whole time, then he knows you are in town. He knows why you are here. Yes, he is going to try to kill you. Yes. Then we need to lay a trap for him. Ruby looked over at him and saw the hardness in his eyes, the look of a man who had already lost a brother and was not about to lose anyone else. What are you thinking? We tell the sheriff everything. We get Garrison to come out here, show him the body, and tell him all about Victor. We make this an official investigation, and then we just wait for Victor to slip up. You trust the sheriff? Finn thought about it for a second. I trust that he wants to catch a killer just as bad as we do. Whether or not that will be enough, well, we will have to see. They left the cabin, locking the door tight behind them, and walked back through the snow, which was coming down even harder now, building up drifts that would make the roads impassable soon. Tomorrow. Finn's voice was sharp enough to cut through the wind. We ride into town tomorrow before the roads are completely blocked. We tell Garrison the whole story, and then we start the hunt. Ruby nodded, even though she knew better. The hunt was already on. Victor knew she was here, and he knew why. He had murdered his own daughter to keep his secret safe. He killed Finn's brother, and he killed Silas Marsh. He was out there watching even now, just waiting for the right time to make his move. The real question was not if he would kill again. The question was who was going to be next. The trap. They found Sheriff Garrison in the saloon the next morning, drinking a cup of coffee and looking over a map of the town. He glanced up as they came in, saw the looks on their faces, and pointed them toward a private table in the corner. Tell me. Finn told him about Luke's death and about discovering Silas Marsh's body out on his property. Ruby told him all about Victor Drummond, about the war crimes, and about the 10-year hunt that brought her all the way here. She told him about Alice asking too many questions and paying for it with her life. Garrison listened to the whole story without saying a word. When they were done, he leaned back in his chair, his weathered face impossible to read. So you are telling me there is a Confederate war criminal hiding out in my town, a man who has murdered at least 3 people that we know about, a man who is still around here, still watching, and still a danger to everyone. Yes, and you want my help to catch him? We want you to do your job. Garrison's eyes went hard. I have been doing my job for 20 years, Miss Vale. I do not need some nurse from back east telling me how to do it. Then prove it. Help us find him before he kills someone else. The sheriff was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the tabletop. At last, he pushed his chair back and stood up. All right, but we are going to do this my way. No vigilante business, no frontier revenge. We find the evidence, we build a proper case, then we bring him in. All by the book, I understand. Good. Now, let us see this body. The 3 of them rode on out to Finn's ranch, Garrison with 2 deputies right behind. The storm had let up just enough to make the ride bearable, but it was still miserable. The cold sunk its teeth right through their coats. The wind whipped at any skin it could find. Even the horses were having a hard time of it. Inside the cabin, Garrison looked over Silas Marsh's frozen body with a slow, careful eye. He went through the pockets, took a long look at the wounds, and made his notes. His face was a stone mask. This man was a Union soldier. The tattoo proves it. So, either our Silas Marsh was going by a fake name, or somebody killed the real Marsh and took his name for himself. Or maybe both. Ruby folded her arms, trying to keep warm. Victor could have done away with Marsh, taken his name, then killed this soldier and left the body here to throw us off his trail. It is possible. Garrison stood up straight. The real question is, why leave the body on Carroll's land? Why not just toss it down one of the mines where no one would ever find it? Because he meant for it to be found, Finn said from the doorway. He wanted to set me up. If this body ever turned up, and people started asking things, who would take the blame? The fellow who owns the land it was buried on. That is smart. Garrison gave a slow nod. It means this Victor fellow is a patient man who thinks ahead. That just makes him a whole lot more dangerous. So what is our next move? We are going to search the mines. If Victor has been using the name Silas Marsh, then Marsh's claim has to be in those mining records. We locate that claim. We find out where he was working. We might find some proof. We might even find him. And if he tries to run, he will have the whole town looking for him. This blizzard has us all penned in for another week at least. He is just as stuck here as we are. So we are going to use this time. We will investigate, we will close in on him, and we will catch him. It all sounded so simple, so logical. But Ruby had been on Victor's trail for too long to trust in simple plans. He was always 3 steps ahead of everyone, always watching and always ready to put down anyone who got too near. She pictured Alice in the church basement. She pictured Luke, buried under the frozen dirt. She pictured Catherine, 10 years cold in a grave back east. This ends here. Ruby's voice was soft, but it was as final as a closing coffin. Whatever it takes, however it happens, this ends. Garrison looked over at her, and you could see something change in his eyes. It looked like recognition, the way one hunter knows another. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It surely does." They rode back into town as the afternoon sun began to die. The hunt was officially on. The trap had been laid. All they needed was for Victor to walk right into it. But Victor Drummond had made it through a war. He had made it through a decade of being hunted. He made it by being smarter and meaner than anyone after him. He was not going to make it easy. He would not slip up unless they forced his hand. Ruby thought on this as they rode. She thought about how you flush out a killer who has stayed in the shadows for 10 long years. The answer came to her just as they got to town, where lamplight was starting to glow in the windows and smoke was curling up from chimneys into the graying sky. She would give him exactly what he wanted. She would give him a target he could not possibly ignore. She would offer up herself. That evening, she laid out her plan for Garrison. He listened with a grim look on his face. "That is far too dangerous. I know. He will make a try for you. I am counting on that. And if we cannot get to him in time, you will at least know where he is. You can grab him before he hurts anyone else." Finn, who had been listening from the other side of the room, spoke up. "No, absolutely not. We will find another way." "There is no other way." Ruby looked him straight in the eye. "Victor is too cautious. He will not show his face unless he figures he has the upper hand. So we are going to give him one. We will let him believe I am all alone, helpless, with no one to protect me. And when he makes his move, we take him down. You are talking about using yourself as bait. I have been nothing but bait for 10 years. This is just the first time I am the one setting the trap." The quiet that came after that was as heavy as a snow-covered roof. At last Garrison spoke. "If we are going to do this, we are doing it with backup. I will have deputies watching, armed and ready to go the moment he shows himself." "Agreed. And you will be armed, something well hidden. Just in case we cannot get to you quick enough, I always am." She showed them the knife she had strapped to her forearm and the little pistol tucked in her boot. They were the tools of her survival, the ones she had carried ever since Catherine was killed. Finn just stared at her for a long while, his face impossible to read. Then he gave one quick nod. "When?" "Tomorrow night." Ruby had it all worked out. "I will be at the church all by myself, paying my respects to Alice. Victor will not be able to resist that kind of twisted poetry, killing me right where his own daughter is lying, and we will be there waiting." Yes. And so it was decided. A trap inside of a trap. Ruby was going to be the lure, and Garrison's men were going to be the snare. It was simple, it was clean, and it was dangerous as all hell. Ruby lay awake that night in the spare cabin, listening to the wind howl while she planned for a death. Not her own, of course. She had no plan on dying in this place. But she could picture Victor's death in perfect detail. She had been picturing it for a decade. By tomorrow night, it might just become a reality. Over in the main house, Finn sat by the fire, just watching the flames and thinking about the woman in his guest cabin. She was not at all what he had imagined when her first letter had arrived. She was not some soft, scared woman who needed saving. She was as hard as frozen iron, with the focus of a sharpened knife, chasing a ghost that most folks would have given up on a long time ago. And tomorrow, she was fixing to walk right into a killer's path. He knew he ought to stop her. He ought to refuse to let her do it. But he recognized that look in her eyes. It was the same look he had seen staring back from the mirror after Luke died. It was the look of a person who would not rest until justice was served, or they were in the ground trying. So he would not try to stop her. He would just make darn sure he was there when Victor showed up, make sure she did not have to face that man alone. In town, over at the sheriff's office, Garrison was busy making his own plans, telling deputies where to be, checking their guns, getting everything ready for the night to come. And somewhere out there in the dark, in some place none of them could even guess, Victor Drummond watched, and he waited, and he smiled, because he had seen this trap coming a mile away. He had been expecting it all along, and he already had his own answer ready. Blood was going to be spilled tomorrow night. The only question was, whose? The storm kicked up something fierce again around midnight. The snow came down thick and fast, burying footprints, covering up secrets, and building up white walls that sealed everyone inside. The blizzard was set to last another week, maybe even 2. That was plenty of time for all this to come to a head. Plenty of time for the awful truth to finally come out. Plenty of time for Ruby Catherine Vale to meet the man who murdered her sister. Plenty of time for Finn Carroll to get justice for his brother. And plenty of time for Victor Drummond to make his final play. The dead woman in the church cellar was quiet and still. The knife work that killed her was precise and clean. And her secrets were buried right there with her. But those secrets were not about to stay buried. Blood had been spilled on the snow. And blood always calls for more blood. It never fails. Out in the mountains, down in the mines, in all the frozen corners where men run to hide from what they have done, a reckoning was on its way. And when it finally arrived, not everybody was going to walk away from it. 16 days of winter. That blizzard just would not quit. It kept right on through the 2nd day and the 3rd and the 4th. Snow fell in great white sheets that turned the whole world into nothing. The snowdrifts piled up higher than a man's head. The roads just vanished. The stagecoach line was completely blocked. The telegraph lines snapped under the heavy ice. The town of Tinup, Colorado, was wiped clean off the map, swallowed up whole by the winter. 47 souls were trapped in there, and one of them was a killer. Sheriff Garrison had everyone move into 3 main buildings to stay warm and safe. There was the saloon with its big cast-iron stove and plenty of wood stacked up. There was the general store, where Beatrice Cotton had enough food to last everybody a month if they were smart about it. And there was the church, where Minister Brenner opened his doors to anyone looking for shelter, families huddled close. Strangers had to become neighbors, and everybody was watching everybody else. Ruby stayed out at Finn's ranch. Garrison figured it was safer out there, far enough away that Victor could not get close without being spotted. The place was defendable, and Finn knew that land like the back of his hand. He would notice if anything was out of place. On the morning of that 2nd day, Ruby started going through Alice Drummond's things with a fine-toothed comb. The trunk had been brought over from the boarding house, and its contents were all laid out on Finn's kitchen table. There were carefully folded dresses, a Bible with a ribbon to mark the page, a hairbrush, and a mirror. Just the ordinary things a young woman would have, starting a new chapter in her life. But buried at the bottom, wrapped up in a shawl, Ruby found the letters. There were 6 of them, written in a neat script on fancy paper. Ruby read each one, and her face got harder with every page she turned. They were all signed, "Your loving father," but a full name was never used. They talked about getting back together, about forgiveness, and about a fresh start in a place where the past could not hurt them. The very last letter, though, was different. It laid out specific instructions. Come to Tinup, ask for the minister, and do not tell a single soul the real reason you are there. Use the mail-order bride story as a cover. I will come find you when the time is right." Ruby put the letters down, her mind racing. Victor had planned out this entire thing. He brought his own daughter here on a lie, using the bride arrangement to cover up what she was really here for. But why? What could he have possibly wanted from her? The answer came to her when she found the photograph. It was tucked away inside the Bible, pressed between the pages like a dried flower. The picture showed a young Alice, maybe 16 years old, standing next to a tall man whose face had been angrily scratched all to pieces. But the scratches were new, done just recently, maybe only days before Alice was killed. And on the back, in Alice's own handwriting, were the words, "He promised he had changed. I wanted to believe him. I was wrong." Poor Alice came all this way thinking she could make peace with her father. She trusted his letters and believed he had truly changed his ways. But then she saw the real man he was. And when she tried to tear down that false image, he took her life for it. A cold fire started burning in Ruby's chest. To keep his secret safe, Victor Drummond had murdered his own daughter. He had cut her throat and left her in the snow like she was nothing more than trash. The man had no bottom to his evil, no line he was not willing to cross. She collected the letters and the photograph and took them to Garrison at the church. The sheriff read every word twice, his weathered face grim and hard. This proves Alice found out who her father really was. Proves she came here to face him down. But it does not tell us what name he's using now. No, but it shows us he is a patient and crafty man. He took months to set this trap, talking his daughter into coming here with that whole cover story about a wedding. That requires planning and money. He is not some desperate man on the run. He is comfortable, settled in, which means he could be anyone. Ruby looked across the church at the families trying to stay warm, at the men playing a game of cards in the corner, and the women cooking on their little stoves. Any one of them could be Victor, the cheerful store owner, the quiet miner, the devout preacher. He had been hiding right under their noses for years and would keep hiding until they forced him out into the open. We have got to narrow down who we are looking at. Ruby turned back to Garrison. Alice asked about 3 men in particular, Brenner, Mercer, and Silas Marsh. One of them is Victor, or at least knows where to find him. Garrison nodded his head slowly. I will bring them in for a chat, one at a time. We will see what shakes loose. You be careful. If Victor figures out we are closing in on him, he will run or he will kill again. Maybe both. I am always careful, Miss Vale. But the words felt hollow. They both knew that careful was not nearly enough against a monster like Victor Drummond. The talks. Garrison began with Minister Brenner. The questioning happened in a small room off the main part of the church, with Ruby and Finn watching from the entrance. Brenner sat bolt upright in a wooden chair, his lined face steady despite it all. I have got nothing to hide, Sheriff. I will answer any question you have. You told Miss Vale you knew Victor Drummond during the war. Garrison's voice was steady and calm. Tell me about that. There is not a whole lot to tell. Our units were near each other for a short while in Virginia, early in the war. We got ambushed. Confederate soldiers had us surrounded. Victor helped us get out. He saved my life and the lives of 3 other men. That was the only time I ever laid eyes on him. And you never saw him again after that. Never. After the war, I headed west to start over, to leave all that violence behind me. I became a preacher because I wanted to spend my life making peace, to make up for all the blood I had seen shed. And yet you never brought this up when Alice came here asking questions. Brenner's calm finally showed a small crack. I did not think it was important. A man I met one time, 15 years ago in the middle of a war. How was I supposed to know it was tied to that poor girl's murder? Because she was asking specifically about Confederate veterans. Because her daddy was Victor Drummond. Because you were one of 3 names she said before she died. I understand how it must look. Brenner met the sheriff's gaze. But I am not a killer, Sheriff. I am a man of God. I pass my days comforting those who are sick and burying those who have passed. I do not make the bodies. Can anyone say where you were the night Alice died? I was by myself in the church getting Sunday's sermon ready. No one else was here. And the night Owen Pritchard died? Alone again. Prayer and thinking are solitary work. Convenient, it is the truth. Garrison let him go, not feeling any better about it. The minister's story made sense, but was impossible to check. He could be exactly who he said he was, or he could be lying with the kind of practiced skill that comes from years of hiding in plain sight. Next up was Dr. Isaac Mercer. The doctor came to the church office looking dead on his feet. His medical bag was slung from one shoulder, and his clothes looked like they had been through a long night of treating frostbite and sickness all over town. I was expecting you. Mercer sat down with a thud. Given my own history, I would suspect myself, too. Tell me about your history with Victor Drummond. Mercer stayed quiet for a long moment, putting his thoughts together. Then he spoke, his voice firm despite the pain hiding beneath it. I was an army surgeon in the war, for the Union. We were positioned near a Confederate prison camp. The things that happened there were just awful. Men starved. Men died from sicknesses that could have been stopped. And some men were hurt just to get information, or for someone's cruel entertainment. Victor was in charge of that camp, he sure was. I treated the prisoners who found a way to escape, wrote down their injuries, and took their stories. After the war ended, they asked me to speak at his trial. But the trial never took place. The charges were dismissed. Powerful friends in his family, people who just wanted the war to be forgotten, Victor disappeared before he could be arrested. I have been trying to track him down ever since. Why? Mercer's hands gripped his medical bag tighter. Because 3 years ago, my wife was murdered. Her throat was cut. The same way as Alice Drummond. The same way as Owen Pritchard. I knew right then that Victor had found me, that he was punishing me for speaking out against him. Do you have any proof of this? No, just a certainty. The kind that settles in your bones when you know your enemy. Victor does not forgive, he does not forget. If you cross him, he will find you sooner or later. It could take years, but he will find you. And you believe he is here in Tinup. I know he is. I tracked him to Colorado 6 months ago. I heard about a Confederate veteran named Silas Marsh working the mines. I came to look into it. What did you find out? Nothing certain. Marsh had died in a mine collapse the year before. But I found things that did not add up. People who described 2 different men using that same name. Mining claims still being worked when they should have been abandoned. Someone was using Marsh's identity. Did you go see this person? No. I was still putting the pieces together when Alice got here and everything went to hell. Where were you the night she died? Tending to a miner with pneumonia. He can tell you I was with him from sunset until sunrise. And Owen Pritchard. I was alone in my office organizing my medical supplies. No alibi. Garrison made some notes. His face was impossible to read. One more question, Doctor. How well do you know Minister Brenner? Not well. We say hello to each other. I treat the people in his church when they get sick. Why? Because both of you say you have a past with Victor Drummond. Both of you have medical knowledge that would make cutting a throat an easy job. Both of you do not have an alibi for at least one of the murders. That makes both of you suspects. Mercer stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. I have dedicated my entire life to healing, Sheriff, to undoing the damage that men like Victor Drummond cause in this world. If you think I would become the very thing I have spent years fighting against, then you do not understand me one bit. I do not need to understand you, Doctor. I just need to find the truth. After Mercer left, Ruby spoke from the doorway. You believe him? That was not a question. Garrison looked up, surprised. What makes you say that? Because you did not push him as hard as you did with Brenner. You gave him the space to tell his story. You wanted to believe him. Maybe I did. Garrison put his pencil down. Mercer lost his wife the same way you lost your sister. That kind of grief does not tell lies. Grief can also drive people mad, drive them to revenge, to becoming the very thing they hate. You think Mercer is Victor? I think anyone could be Victor. That is the whole problem. We are chasing a ghost who has had 10 years to create a perfect disguise. Garrison rubbed his weathered face. Then we keep digging, we keep asking questions, we keep narrowing the circle until we have our answer. And if that answer is someone we trust, well, we will deal with it. But we will deal with it based on facts, not just feelings. The second body, Owen Pritchard, was found on the third day. The scream came at sunrise, Beatrice Cotton's voice, high and torn, cutting right through the morning quiet. Ruby was already awake, dressed with coffee in her hand when the sound carried all the way to Finn's ranch. They rode hard into town, arriving to find a crowd huddled in the alley behind the saloon. Owen lay there in the snow, his throat opened up like a second mouth. Blood had pooled under him, then turned to ice in the night's cold. His eyes stared at absolutely nothing. His hands were curled up into tight fists. But this time there was something else. Something he was clutching in his frozen right hand. A button. Brass, tarnished from age. Confederate Army issue. Ruby knelt down by the body, looking it over with an expert's eye. The wound was the exact same as Alice's, clean and skilled, one cut made from behind. But Owen had fought back. His knuckles were scraped raw. There was skin under his fingernails, and the button had been torn from fabric, not just dropped or put there on purpose. He grabbed his attacker. Ruby pointed to the proof. He tried to hold on. The button was ripped off during the fight. Garrison crouched down beside her, which means the killer wore old Confederate things or keeps them like a souvenir or wanted us to think he did. Finn stood over them, his face dark. This feels staged, a little too obvious. Maybe. Ruby stood up and brushed the snow from her pants. Or maybe Owen finally pushed too hard, asked the wrong questions, and threatened the wrong person. They searched Owen's room above the saloon and found it in chaos, furniture thrown over and all the drawers pulled out, and tossed about with papers scattered all across the floorboards. Looked like someone was hunting for something and tore the whole place to shreds doing it. Finn bent down and picked up a heavy box that had been turned over. The lock on it was busted clean off, and the inside was empty. Whatever it was Owen had, they'd taken it. Ruby looked over the papers on the floor. Most of them were just receipts and ledgers showing who owed money and who'd paid up. Just the everyday business of keeping a saloon running. But one piece of paper was different. It was a letter, all crumpled up and stained, written in Owen's hurried chicken scratch. She smoothed it out best she could and read it out loud. I know who you are. I know what you got up to during the war. I know all about that camp and the prisoners and the things you'd rather stay buried. If you want me to keep my mouth shut, bring $500 to the alley tonight. You come by yourself. You tell nobody. This is the only chance you get. It wasn't signed and it wasn't addressed to nobody. Maybe a first draft or a copy Owen held on to for protection. He was putting the squeeze on the killer. Garrison took the letter from her, looking it over. Owen saw something or heard something that he figured was worth some money, and the killer decided it was cheaper to buy his silence with a blade than with cash. When was this put down on paper? Ruby found the date he'd scribbled at the top. 2 days back, the day after Alice died. So Owen saw something the night Alice was killed. Something that told him exactly who the killer was. He tried to make $1 off it, and it ended up getting him put in the ground. The big question is, what in the world did he see? Finn walked over to the window and peered down into the alley below. From right here, you had a clear view across the street to the boarding house, right into the room Alice had been renting. He must have seen her with somebody. Ruby came up beside Finn at the window. He saw them in there together. Maybe they were hollering at each other, maybe struggling, and he knew who it was. Then where's his written account? Where's the paper that lays it all out? Any fella smart enough to try blackmail would have kept something like that as insurance. Whoever did this to Owen took it when they ransacked this room. That's what they were looking for all along. Any kind of evidence, any proof, anything at all that could point a finger at them. They spent a good 2 hours tearing the place apart and came up with nothing else. The man who killed Owen had been mighty thorough, taking everything that was worth a damn and leaving behind nothing but empty rooms and questions with no answers. Ruby stood there in that wrecked room, a hot frustration building up inside her chest. They were so close, she could feel it in her bones. The killer was starting to panic, starting to make mistakes. That button he left behind, this clumsy search of Owen's room. These were the moves of a man who felt the walls closing in. But a cornered animal is just about the most dangerous thing there is. The hours got quiet. Night came on early, the way it always does in the winter. Ruby headed back to Finn's ranch as the darkness just swallowed up the mountains. She found him out in the barn, tending to his horses with a slow, steady hand. The old familiar rhythm of a brush moving over a horse's hide. The soft little noises of animals settling in. It was peaceful in a way the rest of the world just wasn't. You don't have to stay out here in the cold. Finn said it without even turning around. It's warmer in the house. I know, but sometimes a person just needs the quiet, needs a moment to think without folks asking questions or needing answers. Finn set his brush down and turned to look at her. What's on your mind? Ruby leaned her back against a stall door, just thinking about how many folks Victor has put in the ground. About how many more he's going to kill if we can't manage to stop him. Wondering if I've been chasing a ghost for so long. I wouldn't know the real man if he was standing right in front of my face. You'd know him. How can you be so sure about that? Because you're still drawing breath. If he didn't see you as a real problem, if he just figured you were another lost woman chasing after shadows, he would have paid you no mind. But he knows you're dangerous. He knows you're getting close. That's why he brought you all the way out here. Not to finish you off quick, but to play with you for a while first. That's not exactly what I'd call comforting. It ought to be. It means you're getting the upper hand. He wouldn't be playing games if he felt like he was in control. Ruby stood there quiet for a minute. Then she spoke, her voice a little softer. Tell me about your wife, about Sarah. You never say a word about her. The look on Finn's face shifted. It wasn't like he shut down, just that he got careful, guarded like a man does when he's touching on old hurts. What is it you want to know? What was she like? He was quiet for so long, Ruby figured he wasn't going to answer at all. Then he walked over to the big barn door and looked out at the snow-covered blackness. Outside, she was kind. That's the thing I remember the most. She could find the good in anybody, even folks who sure as hell didn't deserve it. She used to leave food out on the porch for drifters who were just passing through. Used to go visit sick neighbors even when we could hardly spare the time ourselves. She just made the whole world a softer place by being in it. You loved her a whole lot, I did. Still do, in a way. You don't just stop loving someone because they're gone from this world. You just learn how to carry it different is all. Ruby went and stood beside him in the doorway. She stood close enough to feel the heat coming off his body in the freezing cold air. How did she pass? The real story, not the one you tell folks you don't know. Finn was silent for a good long while. When he finally spoke, his voice was all rough with old pain. She was 8 months along with our child. I was gone selling horses, trying to scrape together enough money to make the ranch a little bigger. Grace was supposed to look in on her, but a big storm blew in. The roads were all closed off. Sarah went into labor all by herself. Something went bad wrong. There was bleeding that just wouldn't quit. By the time I made it back 3 days later, she and the baby were already in the ground. I'm so sorry. Everybody's sorry. But it don't change a thing. No, it sure doesn't. They just stood there together in the barn door. Two people who understood that some hurts never truly heal up. They just become a part of who you are, a part of what keeps you moving forward when everything else is telling you to quit. Finn turned his head to look at her. His hazel eyes were steady in the light from the lantern. You asked me what she was like. Now I'm asking you about your sister, about Catherine. You chase her killer, but you never talk about her. Ruby felt that old, familiar tightness in her chest, the kind that always came when Catherine's name was said out loud. She was everything I wasn't. She was warm where I was cold, patient where I was liable to fly off the handle. She wanted to save the whole world. I just wanted to get by. But you both ended up as nurses on account of her. She was the one who convinced me we could make a difference. That healing people mattered more than killing them, even in the middle of a war. I thought she was just a wide-eyed fool. I thought all that kindness was going to get her hurt. It did. Yes, ma'am, it did. Ruby's voice went flat and hard. She helped prisoners get away from Victor's camp, and she got caught. He decided to make an example out of her, cut her throat right in front of the men she had saved just so they'd know the price for standing up to him. How do you know all this? Were you there? No. But one of the prisoners she saved, he found me after the war was over. He told me the whole story, described how she died, how she looked Victor right in the eye in those last moments without a bit of fear, without a single regret. She died believing she had done the right thing. And you've spent 10 years making sure her death counted for something. I've spent 10 years trying to kill the man who murdered her. Whether that counts for anything or not, I just don't know anymore. Finn reached his hand out real slow, giving her plenty of time to pull back. When she did not pull away, his rough hand came to rest over hers on the doorframe. There is a power in making evil answer for what it has done, even if it cannot fix the damage. Ruby glanced down at their hands together. His was bigger, weathered, and covered in the kinds of scars you get from ranch work and living a hard life. Hers was smaller, but it told a similar story. A pale scar on her right palm stood out in the warm glow of the lamp. "What happened there?" Finn asked, nodding at the mark. Ruby snatched her hand back, folding her fingers over the scar to hide it. "A knife, back during the war," she said. "We were patching up a soldier who woke up in a haze thinking we were the enemy. He grabbed a scalpel. I put my hand up instead of letting him get my throat. Smart move. And lucky," she added. "If he had been a hair quicker or I had been a step slower, I would not be here. But you are." "No, I am not." They stood there for a minute in a comfortable quiet, the kind where you do not need to say a word. Outside, a lonesome wind was crying through the pine trees. In the barn, the horses shuffled around in their stalls, and the lamp flame danced. Finally, Ruby broke the silence. "Tomorrow we are setting the bait. I will go to the church by myself. We will see if Victor shows, and if he does not, then we come up with a new plan. But he will be there. I know that man. He cannot pass up a chance to finish the job he started 10 years back." Finn turned to look her square in the eye, his face dead serious. "I do not like this plan. There is too much that can go wrong. Too many ways for you to end up hurt." "I know," she said. "But it is the best shot we have got. It is the only way to flush him out into the open. There has got to be another way." "There is not," she said flatly. "We have investigated. We have tried to pin it on different suspects. We have done everything but hand him what he is after. So that is what we are going to do now. We give him a target he just cannot ignore. You. Me. And if you boys cannot get to me in time," Ruby looked right into his eyes, not even blinking, "then you make damn sure I did not die for nothing. You get him. You finish him. You make sure he can never hurt another soul." Finn's jaw went rigid. "I am not letting you die. You might not get a vote in the matter. Like hell I do not." He moved in closer. So close Ruby could see the little bits of gold swimming in his hazel eyes. So close she could feel the warmth of his breath on her skin. "I have lost too many people, Ruby. I am not about to lose you. You hardly know me. I know what I need to. I know you are brave, and you are stubborn as a mule, and you would die for what you believe is right. I know you have been on your own so long you do not remember what it is like to have someone in your corner. I know you figure this manhunt is all you have got left, but it is not. It just is not. Then what else is there?" "This," he said. "Us. Whatever it is we are turning into." Ruby felt something give way deep inside her. Like a fence post she had sunk years ago to keep everyone out had finally rotted through. She had the urge to take a step back, to put that fence back up, to shield herself from the awful, scary feeling of letting somebody get close enough to matter. But she did not move an inch. Instead, her hand came up to touch his face. She felt the scruff of his beard on her palm, the warmth of his skin, the solid, real feeling of someone choosing to stand there with her in the darkness. Finn placed his hand over hers. He did not pull it away, but he did not push for anything more. He just held it, his touch both gentle and strong. "If we do this," Ruby said, her voice low, "if we let this turn into something real, and Victor gets to me tomorrow, it will break you. The same way losing Sarah did. I do not want to be the cause of that." "Then do not die," he said simply. "I will do my level best not to. That is all I am asking." For a long time, they just stood there, right on the brink of something that could be wonderful or could be awful, or maybe even both. And neither one knew which way the cards would fall. At last, Ruby dropped her hand and took a step back. The air between them suddenly felt cold. "I ought to get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." "Yes, it will." She went to the door and paused, her hand on the wooden frame. "Finn, thank you for hearing me out, for standing by me, for reminding me. There are things in this life worth more than just settling scores. You are welcome." Then she was gone, walking across the deep snow to the guest cabin. Once inside, she slid the bolt on the door and laid down in her clothes, her weapons right where she could reach them. Sleep was a long way off. Too many worries, too many fears churned in her mind. But beneath all that fear, there was a new feeling. It was something warm and delicate and scary as hell. It was hope. The fire changed everything. It roared to life around midnight. Ruby woke up choking on the smell of smoke. She grabbed her coat and guns and burst outside to see the whole sky glowing orange. The general store was on fire. Flames were leaping high into the dark, making crazy shadows dance on the snow. Even from Finn's ranch, a good 3 miles out, she could see the blaze. They spurred their horses and rode like the devil was on their heels. When they got to town, half the building was already gone. Folks were forming bucket brigades from the well, but the water they threw just turned to steam before it even hit the fire. Beatrice Cotton was standing in the middle of the street, her face smudged with soot and wet with tears, just watching her whole life go up in smoke. "The supplies," she kept whispering, again and again. "All the food, all the medicine, everything we need to get by, it is all just burning up." Garrison showed up out of the smoke, his tough old face looking grim. "Was anybody inside?" "No, the store was empty. We got lucky." "Lucky?" Ruby could not take her eyes off the fire. This was not luck. This was planned. "How can you be so sure?" "Because fires do not just start on their own in the dead of winter. Because somebody wanted to destroy our food supply. Somebody who gets what they want from chaos and fear." Garrison's face grew hard. "You are saying this was Victor?" "I know it was. He is raising the stakes. Killing one person at a time was not enough for him. Now he wants to unravel this whole town. Make us all scared. Make us all turn on each other." "But why?" "Because scared people mess up. They let secrets slip. They start pointing fingers. And while we are all fighting amongst ourselves, he can walk around freely and hit us again without anyone seeing him coming." The fire raged all night long. By sunrise, the general store was nothing but a black, burnt-out frame. The supplies were gone, and the town's fear had hardened into something meaner. Panic. Beatrice did some quick math while everyone crowded into the church. "With what folks have in their own pantries and what is at the saloon, we have got food for maybe 3 weeks. 4 if we stretch it real thin. After that, we are in real trouble." "Can we not send for help?" a woman called out. "Ride to the next town over?" Garrison just shook his head. "The pass is snowed in solid. It will be that way for another week, maybe 2. Nobody is coming in, and nobody is getting out. So we are trapped. Trapped in here with a killer running out of food, and winter is just getting meaner." A wave of panic washed over the crowd. Ruby saw it happen. She saw fear sour into anger. She saw neighbors who were sharing coffee yesterday, now looking at each other like strangers. This was what Victor wanted, to split them up and let the fear do his dirty work. She stood up, and her voice cut right through the noise. "Everybody, listen to me. This is exactly what he wants. He wants us scared. He wants us at each other's throats. He wants all this commotion because it gives him a place to hide. Well, we are not going to give it to him. We are going to stay calm. We will ration what we have. We will look after our neighbors. And we are going to catch this son of a gun before he can hurt anyone else." "Those are mighty fine words, Miss Vale," a miner shouted from the back. "But words do not fill a belly, and they sure do not stop a man with a knife." "No," Ruby agreed, "but evidence does, and action does, and we have both. We know this killer is tied to Victor Drummond. We know he is somebody who belongs in this town, somebody folks trust, somebody with power. We are this close to figuring out who he is. We just need a little more time." "How much more time?" the miner shot back. "How many more of us have to die?" "As few as possible." Ruby looked him straight in the eye. "But I will not stand here and lie to you. More people might get hurt before this is over. The only choice we have is if we face it together, or if we let him pick us apart one by one." The crowd started murmuring, but they settled down some. The fear was still hanging in the air, thick as the smoke outside, but the panic was gone, at least for a bit. A quiet voice spoke up from the back of the church, but it was clear enough for everyone to hear. "My personal stores are available." Heads turned. Warren Hayes was standing by the door. He must have slipped in without anyone seeing him. He looked at Beatrice, his face showing concern, but his eyes were steady. "I keep emergency supplies in my office. Dried goods, flour, salt, coffee. It is enough for maybe 20 people for a week if you are careful with it. It is yours if you need it." The offer just hung there. It was generous, almost too generous. Beatrice looked stunned. That is very kind of you, Mr. Hayes. We might have to take you up on that offer." "Of course," Hayes said with a nod. "We are all in the same boat here. A community has to stick together to survive." He said it so earnestly that a few folks nodded along, but Ruby kept her eyes on him. His gaze swept over the room, sharp and precise, taking note of who was talking, who was quiet, who looked scared. He was sizing everyone up like a scientist studying bugs in a jar. "Thank you, Warren," Garrison said, and he sounded truly grateful. "It is good to know we have got a backup plan." Hayes gave a small smile and turned to go. As he walked past Ruby, their eyes locked for just a heartbeat. His stare was flat, and you could not read a thing in it. Then he was out the door, closing it quietly behind him. Ruby felt Finn move next to her. He leaned in and spoke low. "Something about that fella just does not sit right with me." "Me neither," Ruby whispered back. "He is too generous, too calm. The whole town is about to fly apart at the seams, and he is handing out supplies like it is Christmas. Maybe he is just a decent man trying to do some good. Maybe." But Ruby had learned a long, long time ago to listen to her gut. And right now, every part of her was yelling that Warren Hayes was not who he said he was. After the meeting broke up, Garrison pulled Ruby to the side. "You should not be making promises you cannot deliver on." "I did not make any promises. I just told them the truth. We are close. All we need is one last piece of the puzzle. Another mistake from Victor. And if he don't make one, well, then we'll make him make one." "How?" "With a trap. Tomorrow night. I'll go to the church by myself and we'll wait." "Even after the fire? You still want to go through with this?" "Especially after the fire." Ruby's voice was hard as iron. "Victor's getting desperate. He's making big, loud moves. That tells me he's scared we're closing in. We're going to use that fear against him. We're going to give him a target he thinks is an easy take. And when he makes his move, we're going to finish him. You're staking your life on this plan. I've been staking my life on this for 10 years. Tomorrow's just the first time I'm doing it with somebody watching my back." Garrison looked at her for a long second. Then he gave a nod. "All right, we'll do it your way. But I'm putting my men all around that church. The very second he shows his face, we take him down. No speeches, no showdowns. We just put an end to it." "Agreed." They spent the rest of that day getting ready. Finn found himself a spot where he could see the front door of the church plain as day. Garrison put his deputies in hidden places all around the building. Ruby checked her weapons, the knife she kept up her sleeve, the small pistol tucked in her boot, tools she'd been carrying ever since Catherine died. As the sun started to dip low, and the sky turned from white to gray, and then to black, Ruby walked by herself through the snow toward that church. She could feel eyes on her, could sense Victor was out there somewhere, deciding whether or not he was going to take the bait. She stepped inside the church, lit just one single lamp. I knelt by Alice Drummond's coffin, right there in the back room where they kept the departed. The poor girl looked so peaceful, with her blonde hair all fanned out pretty-like around her face. Somebody had put her back in her wedding dress, the very one she died in, the one she'd put on thinking a new life was just about to start. "I'm so sorry," Ruby whispered to the quiet room. "Sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry your daddy was a monster clear to his bones. Sorry you went to your grave still holding out hope he might change." The church was dead quiet, save for the wind moaning outside. Ruby just waited. 1 hour crawled by, then 2. The oil in the lamp burned low, making the shadows stretch out like long, dark fingers. And still nobody came. She finally stood up, madder than a wet hen. The whole trap was a bust. Victor was just too clever, too dadgum careful. He must have smelled the ambush a mile away and just stayed clear. Ruby was just about to leave when she heard it. A noise coming from the main church hall, the sound of boots on wooden planks. She pulled her knife, moving quiet as a church mouse toward the door. The sanctuary was pitch black. The lamp she'd left burning was snuffed out. A little curl of smoke was still rising from the wick. Somebody was in here, waiting in the dark. Ruby took a slow step forward, letting her eyes get used to the gloom. She started making out shapes. The pews, the altar, the big cross on the wall, and a man standing near the door. He was tall and broad, and he was holding something that caught a sliver of moonlight from the windows. A knife. Ruby brought her own blade up, her heart pounding like a drum, but her hands were steady as a rock. Victor. The man moved, but not at her. He was heading for the door, trying to get away. Ruby took off after him, busting out into the snow and the night. She saw him running toward the edge of town, making a break for the mines. She hollered as she chased him, hearing Finn and Garrison and the deputies all closing in from different sides. But Ruby was quicker, she was younger, and she was fueled by 10 long years of pure rage. She followed that shadow right into the mouth of the mine, into a darkness so thick it just ate the light, down into tunnels that twisted and turned like a snake. Her lamp threw crazy shadows all over the place. Her own breath echoed off the stone walls. Up ahead, she could still hear his feet pounding the ground. She pushed on deeper, going down level after level, just following that sound, trusting her gut until she hit a big open chamber and the running stopped. Ruby held her lamp high, looking all around her. It was empty. The whole chamber was empty. She'd lost him. No, not lost. She'd been trapped. Because from behind her, the way she'd just come, she heard it. The awful sound of support beams snapping, of stone groaning, of a cave-in starting. Victor had led her here on purpose. He'd trapped her in a room he'd already set up to collapse. The ceiling started coming down. Ruby ran for her life, throwing herself back toward the entrance as rock and timber crashed down right behind her. The tunnel filled up with dust and grit. She couldn't see a thing, could barely get a breath. She could only run and pray she was going the right way. A light up ahead, sweet blessed light, the entrance. She came bursting out into the cold air just as the tunnel behind her collapsed for good. She fell, to her knees in the snow, just gasping and coughing. Finn got to her first, pulling her to her feet and checking her over. "Are you hurt?" "No, just—" She coughed again, spitting out dust, just angry. Angry because he had played her like a fiddle. Victor had turned her own trap right back on her, lured her into those mines and tried to bury her alive. And he'd come mighty close to succeeding. Garrison showed up, breathing hard. "Did you see him? Did you get a look at who it was?" No, it was too dark, and he was too fast. Ruby wiped some blood from a cut on her forehead. But he knew about the trap. He knew exactly where every single person was going to be. He knew just how to get around all of y'all and get straight to me. That means he was watching us, planning this, just waiting for his moment. Or he's one of us. Finn's voice was hard as iron. One of the folks who knew about the trap, who helped us plan the whole thing out. They all just looked at each other. That terrible idea started to sink in. Victor wasn't some stranger hiding in the woods. He was right here among them. Had been the whole time, somebody they trusted, somebody with some authority, somebody who knew every move they were making before they even made it. And that somebody had just tried to kill Ruby. The only question was who, and they had until sunup to figure it out. Because Ruby knew with a cold feeling in her gut that Victor was done playing games. Tomorrow somebody else was going to die. And if they didn't find him first, that somebody might just be her. The fourth body, Minister Jacob Brenner, was found at dawn on the 7th day. He was hanging from the church bell tower, a rope knotted tight around his neck, his feet dangling about 6 inches above the snow that had piled up against the church wall. His face was a terrible shade of purple, his tongue sticking out, his eyes bulged out and frozen solid. But it wasn't the hanging that had killed him. His throat had been cut clean open first. Ruby stood there in the snow, looking up at that poor man, her mind just whirling. Garrison had questioned Brenner just 2 days back. The minister had been helpful, if a little jumpy, but he'd been alive. Now he was swinging in the wind like some awful bell, and everything they thought they knew had just been blown all to pieces. Finn came up beside her, his face like a thundercloud. "This changes everything." "Yes, it does," Ruby said, her voice flat. "If Brenner is dead, then he wasn't Victor. Which means we've been chasing the wrong fella. Or Victor wants us to think we have." "No," Ruby shook her head. "Brenner was genuinely scared when we talked to him, genuinely confused. He wasn't a good enough actor to fake that kind of terror. He was innocent. And now he's dead because Victor saw him as a threat. A threat to what? To Victor's real identity. They got the body down with some help from the townfolk who had started to gather. Beatrice Cotton was standing right at the front of the crowd, her face as hard as the frozen dirt. "4 dead now," her voice rang out across the churchyard. "Alice, Owen, Garrison's man, Brenner. How many more before y'all do something?" "We are doing something," Garrison's deputy, a young fellow named Thomas Webb, spoke up. "We're investigating." "Investigating?" Beatrice spat the word out like it was poison. "While you investigate, our people are dying. While you gather your evidence, families are burying their own. This has to stop." "It will," Ruby said, looking her straight in the eye. "But we have to be smart. Victor wants us to panic. He wants us making mistakes. We're not going to give him that satisfaction. Easy for you to say. You're not from around here. You can pack up and leave when this is all over. We have to live with what happens." "Then help us end it the right way." Ruby's voice got harder. "Help us catch him so he can face real justice, so everyone can see what he is, so nobody can ever say we were wrong." The crowd started muttering. Some folks nodded, but others still looked doubtful. Fear and anger are a dangerous mix, and Ruby could feel both of them bubbling up just under the surface. Inside the church, they laid Brenner's body down next to the others. 4 coffins, all lined up now, waiting for the ground to thaw enough for a proper burial. The cellar had turned into a morgue. Ruby looked at the wound with a professional eye, same way as the others. Clean, deep, left to right. But there was something different this time. She checked Brenner's hands and found what she was looking for. He fought back. She showed Finn the little bits of skin she found under his fingernails. "And look at this." She pointed to some bruising on Brenner's knuckles. He punched his attacker hard enough to leave a mark. So somewhere in this town, someone's sporting a fresh bruise, maybe a black eye or a split lip. Or they're good enough to have dodged the blow. Ruby stood up. But it gives us something, a timeline. Brenner was alive yesterday evening. A whole mess of people saw him at supper. He died sometime between midnight and sunup. That makes our window of time a whole lot smaller, and our list of suspects, too. Finn crossed his arms. Who wasn't accounted for during those hours? Everyone. It was the middle of the night. Folks were in their own homes. Nobody has an alibi for midnight. Then we look at who had the opportunity. Who could move around town without anyone seeing him? Who had a key to the church tower and access to a rope? Ruby walked over to the window and looked out at the little town. 47 people, take away the 4 who are gone, leaves 43. And one of them was Victor Drummond. "We've been thinking about this all wrong," she said slowly, kinda talking it through. "We figured Victor would be someone with clear ties to the Confederacy, a soldier who fought in the war. But what if he's someone who wiped that whole past clean away? How? By making up a whole new life from scratch. Not by stealing someone's name like we thought with Silas Marsh, but by building a person who never existed, someone with no history at all before he showed up in Tin Cup." Finn thought on that for a second. That would take money, connections, time to build up trust. All things Victor would have. His family was wealthy. He would have had access to money even after the war. Ruby turned back to face him. "We need to look at every single person who came to Tin Cup within the last 5 years. Anybody whose story can't be checked out, anybody who just sort of appeared out of nowhere. That could still be a dozen people. This is the frontier. Half the folks here are running from something. Then we start with the ones who have the skills Victor would need. Medical knowledge for those perfect cuts on the throat. Mining knowledge to know his way around those tunnels. A good business head to keep up a believable cover. The assayer." The thought hit Ruby right in the middle of the night. She sat straight up in bed in the little spare cabin, her mind suddenly clear as a bell. Mercer had said it days ago. The man who bought the ore from Silas Marsh's claim. The one who came around once a month. A distinguished-looking man, gray hair with scars on his hands. The assayer. Warren Hayes. Ruby had seen him around town, but she'd never really paid him any mind. He mostly kept to himself, ran his business out of a little office near the Mining Claims building. Miners would bring him their ore samples. He'd test them, tell them what they were worth, and pay a fair price. He was quiet, professional, and respected. And she realized she knew next to nothing about him. She got dressed in a hurry, grabbed her knife and her pistol, and cut across the snow to the main house. She found Finn already awake, just sitting by the fire, with his rifle resting on his lap. "You're not sleeping either." He said it like a simple truth, not a question. "Warren Hayes, when did that fella show up in Tin Up?" Finn had to think on it. 3 years back, maybe 4. He opened the assayer's office after old man Hutchkins called it quits. "Why do you ask? What do you know about the man, his past, where he's from?" "Not a thing. He's a quiet man, does his job, pays what he owes, and stays out of folks' business. Never causes trouble," Ruby said the words back to him. "Or maybe he just never gets caught causing it. What if Hayes is our man, Victor? And what proof do you have?" "The proof is that he is the only soul in this town we know for sure had contact with Silas Marsh. The proof is that an assayer has every reason to be in those mines, knows the layout of the tunnels, and has tools that can make clean, sharp cuts." Ruby walked back and forth, her mind racing. "And the proof is that we know absolutely nothing about where he came from. He just appeared here one day, a grown man with money and a trade, but no history we can check. Well, that's half the fellas in this territory. Then we will check it. We are going to search his office and his rooms. We will find our proof. And what if we are wrong? What if Hayes is an innocent man and we break into his place? Then we will tell him we are sorry. But if we are right and we do nothing, somebody else is going to die." Finn got to his feet and checked his rifle. "Then we are moving now before the sun is up, before a single person can see us." They went and woke Grace, telling her the plan. She was to keep an eye on the main street and give a signal if Hayes came out of his rooms over the assayer's office. Finn and Ruby would go through the office itself. At 4 in the morning, the town was as dark and quiet as a tomb. A light snow was falling, making their footsteps silent. Ruby worked the lock on the assayer's office door with a set of tools she'd kept with her ever since the war. The lock gave a soft click and opened. Inside, the place was tidy as a pin. Testing equipment sat in perfect rows. Scales for weighing ore were on a bench, and chemicals were in bottles with neat labels. A desk held ledgers that tracked his business. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. Ruby started a careful search, checking drawers, feeling for any hidden compartments, and looking over every last piece of paper. Finn searched the back room where Hayes stored his samples and extra tools. Finn was the one who found it. "Ruby, get in here." She went to him in the back. He was standing before a locked cabinet, its door now pried open. Inside, instead of rocks and ore, were personal things. There was a Confederate officer's uniform, perfectly preserved, a journal with entries dating all the way back to the war, and buried beneath it all was a wooden box. Finn lifted the lid. Inside lay his trophies. A woman's wedding band, a medal from the military, a pocket watch. Little keepsakes that meant the world to the people who once owned them. Alice's ring. Ruby picked it up, the metal cold against her skin. Owen's medal. She looked at the watch. Luke's initials were carved on the back. These belonged to the people he killed. Finn's voice was like stone. He keeps them like souvenirs. Ruby opened the journal and read the pages in the dim lamplight. There were dates, names, and the ways he did it. It was a cold, careful record of murder that stretched back 15 years. And on the very first page, written in a steady hand, were the words, "Property of Captain Victor Drummond, 3rd Virginia Cavalry. We got him." Ruby snapped the journal shut and slid it deep into her coat pocket. "This is all the proof we need. It is all written down. We will give this to Webb, to the Territorial Marshal as soon as he gets here, and Victor will hang." She was just reaching for the box of trophies when a light flickered outside the window. It was faint and far off, but it was there. Finn crept to the window, staying in the dark. He froze up solid. Someone is coming. A lantern was moving up the street, coming from where Hayes's rooms were. Ruby's heart pounded in her chest. How much time? 30 seconds, maybe not even that. They were out of time. The busted cabinet lock was in plain sight. The trophies were scattered on the shelf. Anyone who walked in would know right away the place had been tossed. The back room. Finn put out their lamp and started for the rear exit. "No!" Ruby caught his arm. "If we bolt, he will know we found it. He will burn everything and vanish before help ever gets here. We are staying. We will face him. Ruby, we have to stay." The sound of boots was on the stairs now, slow and steady. It was the sound of someone who had seen their light from his window and was coming to see who it was. The sound of someone who knew everything that was in that cabinet and what it would mean if someone found it. Finn set himself by the door, his rifle at the ready. Ruby pulled her knife, the journal safe inside her coat. Her heart was beating like a drum, but her hands were perfectly still. The office door eased open. They held their breath. Somebody was here. Finn blew out the lantern and moved beside the door. Ruby clutched her knife, the journal pressed against her. The office door swung open. A man stepped in, struck a match, and lit a lamp on the desk. Warren Hayes stood there in the glow, staring right at them through the open doorway to the back room. He was a man in his 50s with grayin hair, a thin face, and eyes as cold as a winter creek. He had on a gentleman's coat and held a walking stick with a silver top. When he finally spoke, his voice was educated and eerily calm. "Miss Vale, Mr. Carroll, I was wondering when you two would finally figure it out." The showdown had begun. Ruby stepped out into the main office, her knife held low. Finn came right behind her, his rifle aimed true. Victor Drummond. Hayes, or who they now knew as Victor, offered a small smile. It was not a friendly look. The real Warren Hayes passed away 4 years ago from a bad heart. I simply took over his business, his good name, and his life. It was surprisingly simple. He had no family to ask any hard questions. He had no friends who were close enough to spot the small changes. Out here on the frontier, a man can be whoever he says he is. You murdered him. I helped him along his way. Victor placed his walking stick on the desk. He was a dying man already. I just helped speed up the clock a bit and took on his identity. It was a much neater affair than what happened to poor Silas Marsh. And Brenner. Ruby stayed back, moving in a slow circle. Why did you kill him? Because he had a memory of me from the war. It was faint, but it was there. When Alice started poking around and then you showed up on your little mission, I could see the lines starting to connect. Brenner became a loose end, and I do not leave loose ends. You killed your own daughter. Alice was a fool. Victor's voice turned to ice. She came all the way out here believing I had changed my ways, that being a father actually meant something to me. She found out she was wrong, and that made her a danger. So I took care of that danger. Finn's finger tightened on the trigger. Give me one good reason I should not shoot you where you stand. Because you are after justice, not just plain murder. That ugly smile came back to Victor's face. You want to see me in a courtroom, found guilty in front of everyone, and then hanged. If you shoot me down in this dark room, you are no different from me. I could live with that. But can Miss Vale? Victor's eyes locked on Ruby. She has hunted me for 10 years, all by the book. Is she going to toss aside all her beliefs just to get even? Is she going to let you become a killer just so she can feel justice is done? Ruby stared right back into Victor's eyes. She thought of Catherine and Alice, and every last person whose stolen treasures sat in that cabinet. She thought about pulling her own trigger and finishing it all right then and there. Then she lowered her knife. No. We are taking you to trial. We are going to do this the right way. Victor let out a laugh. Still the righteous one, are you not? Just like your sister. Do not you dare speak about her. And why not? She was just as self-righteous, believed she could fix the world, one sorry soul at a time. It was a real pleasure to show her how wrong she was. Ruby's grip on her knife got tighter. Finn saw it and moved to stand between them. He's trying to get under your skin. He wants you to slip up. Do not you give him what he wants. Victor gave a long, dramatic sigh. Well, this has certainly been an education. But I am afraid I cannot let you take me into custody. I have put in too much work to build this life just to give it up to some frontier justice. His hand started to move toward the inside of his coat. Finn fired. The shot hit Victor in the shoulder and spun him clean around. The pistol he was going for hit the floor with a clatter. Victor stumbled and grabbed the desk to keep from falling, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. You shot me. He sounded like he was truly shocked. You went for a gun. Finn's voice was calm as a river. I stopped it from happening. I am unarmed now. Good. That means you will live long enough to see the gallows. From outside, they heard shouts. The gunshot had woken the town. Feet were pounding toward the assayer's office. Grace was the first one through the door, with Beatrice and other townspeople right behind her, all drawn by the sound. They all stopped short, taking in the scene. Victor was bleeding. Ruby and Finn were standing over him. The open cabinet with its terrible collection was there for all to see. Is that... Beatrice moved in closer and saw the trophies. Oh my God, those things belong to the victims. Warren Hayes is Victor Drummond. Ruby's voice was loud enough for every person there to hear. We have the proof. His own journal, where he wrote down his murders. Keepsakes from Alice, Owen, and Luke. Everything we need to see him convicted. The crowd started to push forward. Ruby could see the anger swelling in their eyes, saw their hands moving toward their own weapons. She could see how thin the line was between justice and a lynch mob. We are taking him to the church, she said, her voice loud and firm. We will lock him up. We will send for the territorial marshal. We will do this by the law. Why should we wait? One of the miners shoved his way to the front. We could hang him right now, save the territory, the trouble, and the money, because that is exactly what he is hoping for. Ruby pointed right at Victor. He wants us to become murderers just like him, to pull us right down into the mud with him. We are not going to give him that satisfaction. Beatrice came and stood next to Ruby. She is right. We do this proper. We show everyone, and that includes him, that justice is real, even way out here. The crowd paused for a moment. The whole thing was balanced on the edge of a knife. Then Grace spoke up. My brother Luke gave his life to expose this man. His death had meaning because he was trying to do the right thing. We should honor him by finishing what he started. The legal way, the proper way. The anger in the air finally broke. Men lowered their guns. The mob turned back into a town. They took Victor and locked him in the church cellar, right there with the bodies of the people he killed. Ruby figured that was a fitting kind of justice. Let him live out his last days with the ghosts of what he had done. Webb sent riders out to the closest marshal station despite the snow. The territorial judge finally rode in 5 days later, making his way through half-cleared passes with a whole escort of federal deputies. The trial. The trial got started on the 14th day of winter. They held it right there in the church since it was the only building big enough to fit everybody. The judge, a hard-looking man by the name of Aldrich, ran things from up on the pulpit. Victor sat in a chair facing everybody, his hands and feet in shackles, his shoulder all bandaged up. He looked peaceful, almost like he didn't have a care in the world. Ruby sat in the front row, right next to Finn and Grace. Behind them, the entire town had come to watch. This was their justice, too. Their chance to see evil get a name and a judgment. The prosecution laid out all the evidence, one piece at a time. The journal that laid out all the murders, the trophies that matched up with the victims. A testimony from Ruby about Victor's war crimes, about Catherine's death, and about the 10-year hunt that had brought her right here. The defense lawyer they gave Victor, a young fella from Denver, tried to argue it was the wrong man, that there wasn't enough evidence, that the confession was forced. But none of it meant much against the cold, hard proof. On the third day, Ruby took the stand. The prosecutor, a territorial attorney named Graves, asked her to describe how Catherine died. Ruby spoke in a steady voice that never once shook. She told them how Catherine had helped prisoners escape, how Victor had found out about it, and how he had executed her right in front of the very men she had. A lesson learned the hard way. When she finished her story, you could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. Graves turned his head toward Victor. Does the man at the defendant's table have anything to say about this testimony? Victor got to his feet slow-like, the chains on him clinking. I don't deny a word of it. I recall Miss Catherine Vale plain as day. She was just a girl, full of ideals and not much sense. She believed a little kindness was more important than staying alive. I taught her different. Well, the whole room just about exploded. Judge Aldrich slammed his gavel, hollering for order. You're admitting you murdered a Union nurse in wartime, Graves pushed him. I'm admitting I executed a traitor who was helping the enemy. Victor's voice was steady as a rock. I acted on my conscience and did my duty as a Confederate officer when I cut her throat, when I got rid of a threat. It was the quickest way. Ruby felt Finn's hand cover hers, keeping her anchored to the floor. She wanted to fly across that room, wanted to bury her knife right in Victor's heart, but she stayed put. She kept her mouth shut and let the law do the job she couldn't. On the fourth day, Grace spoke about Luke's death. She told them about finding his body out by the mine, about all the long years of sorrow, of just wondering who killed her brother and what for. Victor seemed to listen with real interest. When they asked if he was the one who killed Luke Carroll, he just shrugged his shoulders. I've killed a fair number of people. If this Luke Carroll stumbled onto something that put me at risk, then yes, I reckon I took care of him. Don't make a habit of keeping a list. The pure, cold-blooded nerve of it left the courtroom dead silent. The prosecutor brought up his last few witnesses. Beatrice told them how she found Owen's body. Webb talked about what he saw when he looked over Garrison's corpse. A miner who knew Silas Marsh testified that the real Marsh had been a good, gentle man, nothing at all like the cold-hearted professional who took his name later. On the fifth day, it was time for closing arguments. The defense lawyer, bless his heart, gave it a try, talking about reasonable doubt, how memories and feelings can color a story, how the physical proof could be seen in different ways. Nobody was buying it. It seemed like even he didn't believe the words coming out of his own mouth. Graves stood up for the prosecution and pointed a finger straight at Victor. This man is a war criminal who has dodged justice for 15 long years. He has murdered Union soldiers, his own daughter, and innocent folks from this town. He hasn't shown one bit of remorse, not a speck of humanity, or any sign that he knows his actions were wrong. The evidence is a mountain. The crimes have been proven. Justice calls for a conviction and an execution. Judge Aldrich sent the jury out to make their decision. They weren't gone 20 minutes. Guilty on every single charge. The judge stared hard at Victor. Do you have anything you want to say before I pass sentence? Victor stood tall and looked all around the courtroom. His eyes landed on Ruby. I regret not a single thing. His voice was strong and clear for all to hear. I did what I had to do to survive and to get ahead. I am not ashamed of what I've done. I'm only disappointed that smaller minds can't grasp that strength matters more than feelings. He turned back to the judge. I know you're fixing to sentence me to hang. That's your right according to the law. But you need to understand this. I am not afraid. Death doesn't scare a man who has looked it in the eye 1,000 times and never flinched. You can kill my body, but you can't touch what I am. Judge Aldrich's face was carved from stone. Victor Drummond, I sentence you to be hanged by the neck until you are dead. This sentence will be carried out in 3 days' time. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none to give. In the days that followed, Ruby never went down to the cellar to see Victor. She had nothing left to say to him, but Grace did. On the evening before the hanging, Grace went down those stairs with a lamp and a chair. She sat down right in front of Victor's cell. He just watched her with a bit of curiosity. You're the sister, Luke's kin. I am. Come to spit curses at me or beg for answers. No. Grace set the lamp on the floor. I came to tell you that Luke's death wasn't for nothing. He found your hideout. He found the proof of your crimes. And even though you killed him for it, that proof survived. His death is the very reason you were caught. How poetic. More than poetic. It's the truth. Luke died doing what was right. What will you be dying for? Victor cracked a smile. I'll be dying for being smarter than everyone else, for refusing to play pretend that morals mean more than staying alive, for living my life exactly how I pleased, with no apologies. Then you'll die alone with no one to mourn you. I never expected anything different. Grace stood up and picked up her lamp. Tomorrow, when they slip that rope over your head, I'll be watching. And when you fall, when your neck snaps, I won't feel a thing. Not satisfaction, not sorrow, just relief that you're finally gone from this world. I'm sure that will be a great comfort to you. It will. Because unlike you, I can still feel something. Even if it's just relief. You died on the inside a long, long time before tomorrow. You just don't know it yet. She left him sitting there in the dark. Finn found Ruby later that night in the barn, brushing down the horses with a steady hand. Her arms were moving on their own, but her mind was a million miles away. You doing all right? She kept on brushing. I figured I'd feel different, like I'd won something or satisfied. Something. But all I feel is empty. That'll pass. Will it? Ruby put the brush down. For 10 years I hunted him. For 10 years, my whole life was about finding Victor Drummond and making him pay for what he did to Catherine. Now he's caught, convicted, and about to die. And I feel nothing at all. Finn stepped closer, standing beside her in the quiet of the barn. Maybe that's the whole point. Maybe justice ain't supposed to feel like anything. It just is. Then what am I supposed to do now? Who am I if I'm not Catherine's sister looking for revenge? You're Ruby, a good nurse and a brave woman. Someone who spent a decade refusing to quit when most folks would have given up after a year. Finn's voice was soft. He ain't the one who defines you anymore. You can be whoever you decide to be. I don't know how to decide. All I know is how to hunt. Then it's time to learn. We can learn it together. Ruby leaned into him. She let him hold her. She let herself feel the warmth of another person without pulling away. It felt strange and hard, but it wasn't a bad feeling. Tomorrow he dies. Her voice was just a whisper. Tomorrow it's finally over. Yes. And then what? Then we bury our dead. We help this town put itself back together, and we start figuring out what it looks like to really live, instead of just trying not to die. The morning of the execution came on cold and clear. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue. A fresh blanket of snow covered everything in clean white. It was beautiful, and it didn't care one bit. They put up the gallows right in the town square. Just a simple platform, a rope, and a trapdoor, nothing fancy. This was about getting a job done, not putting on a show. The whole town turned out. Some came to see justice served, some were just drawn by a dark curiosity, and some were there because it was important to be a witness, to carry the proof that a great evil had been punished. Ruby stood with Finn and Grace. Beatrice came and stood with them, her face like stone. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. They brought Victor out from the church cellar at high noon. He walked steady, even with the chains on. His face didn't show any fear or regret, just that same calm look he'd worn through the whole trial. The executioner, a federal marshal they brought in just for this, asked Victor if he had any last words. Victor looked out over the crowd. His eyes found Ruby's one more time. Miss Vale, you gave up a decade of your life for this moment. I surely hope it gives you whatever it is you need. Ruby just held his gaze and said nothing. Victor gave a little smile. I figured as much. Revenge never does satisfy. You'll learn that soon enough. They pulled the hood down over his head. They tightened the noose around his neck. Ruby didn't look away. She had earned the right to see this. She had paid for it with years on the hunt, with nights full of bad dreams, with the heavy weight of anger and sorrow. She was going to watch every last second of it. The trapdoor swung open. Victor Drummond dropped. The rope snapped tight. His neck broke with a sound you could hear. His body jumped once, and then it just hung there, still. Ruby watched until the executioner checked for a pulse and said he was dead. She watched them cut him down and load him onto a wagon. She watched them take his body to be buried in an unmarked plot outside of town. No service, no headstone. Then she turned around and walked away. Behind her, the crowd started to break up. Folks went back to their lives. The show was over. Justice had been done. Ruby walked to the cemetery, to the graves that were waiting for the ground to thaw for a spring burial. Alice, Owen, Garrison, Brenner, Mercer. All of Victor's victims would rest here, remembered and missed. She knelt in the snow by the wooden cross that would one day be Alice's headstone. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you, but I made sure he paid for it. I made sure everybody knows what he did. The wind was her only answer, cold and clean. Finn found her there about an hour later. He sat down next to her in the snow and didn't say a word, just being there, a steady presence. At last, Ruby spoke. I keep waiting to feel something, relief or satisfaction, anything. But it's just this empty space. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. Taking a life, even a monster's life, ain't supposed to feel good. It's just a thing that has to be done sometimes. Catherine would have hated all of this, the hunt, the hanging, all of it. She would have wanted to show him mercy, I think, but she's not here to make that choice. You are, and you chose justice. There's nothing wrong with that. Ruby stood up slowly and looked out at the mountains, capped with snow and looking like they'd be there forever. The world hadn't changed a bit. Victor was dead, but Catherine was still gone. Justice was done, but the grief was still there. What do I do now? The question just hung there in the freezing air. A year later, winter came back to the high country. It started with the first snow on an October morning. Light little flakes that melted as soon as they touched the ground. Just a hint of the season on its way. Ruby stood in the doorway of her own small house, just watching it fall. The house was simple. 2 rooms, a wood stove, and a little garden plot out. She had scraped together every dollar from her doctoring to buy it. That place was the first real thing she could call her own since the war. After they dealt with Victor, spring took its sweet time coming. The snow gave way to mud in patches, then came the green grass, and then wildflowers with colors so dang vibrant they stung your eyes. After so many months of nothing but white and gray, Ruby set up her clinic right where Dr. Mercer used to be. She scrubbed it clean from top to bottom, put a fresh coat of paint on the walls, and hung up a brand new sign that read, Ruby C. Vale, Medical Services. Folks started showing up little by little. A miner came in with a busted finger, then a little one burning up with a fever, and a woman struggling hard to bring a baby into the world. After that, the news got around town. Ruby took care of every last one of them with a steady hand. She charged folks what they could afford and took chickens or a cord of wood if they were short on cash. She was building a new life, one person at a time. Grace was right there by her side, picking up the nursing trade and helping out. You could see Luke's memory in how careful Grace was with the tools and how gentle she was with the folks who were hurting. She was turning into the kind of healer her brother never got the chance to be. Beatrice used the insurance money and donations from the town to build her general store back up. It was a little smaller, but it got the job done. She ran it with that same grit and determination that got her through the winter. That spring, proper headstones started filling up the cemetery. Ruby would go visit, and when the flowers started to bloom, she'd bring some with her. She'd talk to Catherine Stone, telling her about learning patience, about how the town was doing, and about the little wins and the everyday fights. One night, on her way back from that cemetery, Finn just sort of appeared and started walking alongside her. He said, "You've been mighty quiet." She answered, "I've been thinking on staying for good, making this my home." He asked her, "Is that what you really want?" She told him, "For 10 years, all I did was move. I never settled in one spot long enough to grow any roots." Ruby stopped dead in her tracks and looked right at him. "The thought of staying put, of tying myself to a place and to people, it scares me half to death." "Why is that?" he asked. "Because if I stay, it means I have to care. And if I care, it means I can lose everything all over again. Lose the people I care about." Finn's voice was soft when he replied, "You can lose people no matter if you stay or if you go. Running away from grief doesn't save you from it. It just means you have to bear it all by your lonesome." Ruby didn't say anything for a good long while. Then she said, "If I'm going to stay, I need my own house. Not a room at the boarding house, and not a place on your ranch. Something that belongs to me." "All right," he said. "And let's get one thing straight. I'm not staying here for you. I'm staying because it's my choice. This town needs a doctor, and I've got the skills. I'm staying because I'm just plain tired of running." "Understood," he nodded. But then her voice got a little softer. "But I would like it if we could see each other, as more than just friends." A real smile spread across Finn's face, the kind that made his eyes light up. "I'd like that an awful lot," he said. They walked on through the cool spring evening. They didn't hold hands or nothing, but they were close. Just two broken people figuring out how to be around each other, without their walls up or putting on any airs. When they reached the edge of town, Ruby stopped. She looked back at the cemetery up on the hill. She could just barely make out Catherine Stone as the light started to fade. "I'm going to stay," she said, saying the words out loud to see how they felt. "I'm going to make something of my life here. I'm not trying to replace what I lost. I'm just going to build something new." "Sounds to me like you're picking a future," Finn said, "not just toughing out the present." "Yeah," she said. "I reckon it does." A year later, Ruby stood in her own doorway, watching the first snowflakes of winter fall. She knew deep down she had done the right thing. Inside, folks were waiting for her. There was a boy with a bad cough, an old woman whose joints were aching, and a miner who'd gotten his hand tangled in some machinery. Ruby saw to each one of them. She took what they could give, whether it was cash, a couple of chickens, firewood, or an honest day's work. She was making a life for herself, one person at a time. Grace had gone to live with Beatrice. She helped out at the store and kept on with her nurse's training. Those two women struck up the most surprising friendship. I suppose one kind of sorrow knows another, and folks start to heal when they share the same space. Finn came by Ruby's house 3 nights out of the week. They'd make supper together and talk about all the little things that happened during the day. Sometimes they'd just sit there quiet, and it felt right. Their bond grew slow and steady, like two people learning to trust again after being hurt bad. One night, as they sat near her stove, Ruby started talking about the bad dreams that still haunted her. "I dream about that mine," she said, "about being trapped under the earth, and about Victor getting away and hunting me down." Finn just listened. He didn't offer up any empty words to make her feel better. "The dreams don't come as often now," Ruby went on. "It used to be every single night. Now it's maybe once a week. That's progress, I reckon." "It is progress," he agreed. "But I can't help but wonder if they'll ever go away for good. If I'll ever make it through a whole night without waking up and reaching for a gun that ain't there anymore." "Maybe not," Finn said. "But maybe that's okay. Some scars just don't ever fade all the way. They just become a part of you." Ruby looked over at him. "You still dream about Sarah every night, don't you? Does it ever get any easier?" "No," he said. "But it changes. It's not as sharp as it was. It's more like an old brake that aches something fierce when a storm's rolling in." Finn reached out and took her hand. "It's not that I love her any less. I'm just learning how to love other things, too." "Other things?" Ruby's voice was barely a whisper. "Or other people," he said, maybe a little of both." They just sat there together, the firelight dancing on their faces. Two souls who had lost more than their share and somehow, in all that ruin, had managed to find one another. It wasn't a fairy tale. Some days were a real struggle. Some nights the bad dreams got the best of them. But they were there, and they were alive, and they were piecing together something that looked like a life. And that was enough. For right then, it was more than enough. The town decided to hold a memorial on the day Victor had faced his justice. It wasn't for him, of course. It was for the people he'd hurt. They all met up at the cemetery where real headstones finally stood over the graves. Alice Drummond, Owen Pritchard, Sheriff Hal Garrison, Minister Jacob Brenner, and Dr. Isaac Mercer. There was also a stone for Catherine Vale, Ruby's sister. Her body was buried somewhere far away, but her memory deserved a place here. Ruby stood right in front of Catherine's stone. She'd carved out the words for it herself. It read, "Catherine Vale, nurse, 1842 to 1866. She gave her life so others could live. We are here today because she was brave." One after another, folks stepped up to share what they remembered about the ones they'd lost. They talked about how kind Alice had been during her short time with them, about Owen's awful jokes, about how fair Sheriff Garrison was, about Minister Brenner's quiet words, and about Dr. Mercer's healing hands. When it was Ruby's turn to say something, she opened her mouth, but no words came out. They were all caught in her throat, weighed down by a sorrow that had never truly gone away. Finn moved to her side and spoke for her. "Catherine Vale saved 30 men during the war," he said. "She helped them get away from torment and death. She paid with her life for making that choice, and her sister spent the next 10 years making sure her sacrifice wasn't for nothing. She made sure the man responsible paid for what he did." He stopped for a breath. "We can't bring any of them back, but we can remember them. We can build lives that would make them proud. We can choose to be good to each other instead of cruel, choose justice instead of payback, and choose life instead of death." You could hear folks in the crowd murmuring that he was right. Ruby laid some wildflowers on Catherine's stone, yellow and purple, the colors her sister loved best. "I miss you," she whispered so low only she could hear. "I miss you every single day. But I'm finally living. I'm really and truly living, not just getting by. I reckon you would be happy about that." A soft wind whispered through the cemetery, almost like a gentle hand. Ruby turned away from the grave and started walking back to town with Finn right there beside her. Grace and Beatrice followed along. Behind them, the stone stood like a guard over the dead, while the living kept on moving forward. 2 years later, Ruby was sitting in her examination room, writing in patient files. Outside, the snow was falling again. It was another winter, the third one since Victor had died. The nightmares only came about once a month now. She was sleeping better and even smiling more. That feeling of always having to look over her shoulder had softened, but it never left her completely. Some habits just dig in too deep. A knock came at the door. Finn stepped inside, stomping the snow off his boots. He sat down and studied her face. "You are always busy, but I hope not too busy for me. There is something I have been meaning to ask you." Ruby put her pen down. "All right," he asked. "Will you marry me?" The question just hung there in the silence. It was simple, straight to the point, and scared her to death. Ruby's first thought was to say no, to keep that wall up and protect herself from letting someone all the way in, to always have one foot ready to bolt. But Lord, she'd been running for 12 long years. She was just plain tired. "Yes," the word came out of her mouth, steady as a rock. "Yes, I will marry you." Finn smiled and pulled out a simple gold band, plain and practical. "It was my mother's. I have been carrying it around for 6 months now, just waiting for the right time to ask." Ruby took the ring from him and slid it onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. "I cannot promise you that I will be easy to live with." She looked him straight in the eyes. "I have scars. I still wake up screaming sometimes. I see danger where there is not any. I might not ever be the wife that Sarah was." Finn took both of her hands in his. "I do not want you to be Sarah. I want you to be Ruby, the one with the scars, the one who is careful and fierce. That is the woman I am choosing." She squeezed his hands. "Then I am choosing you too. I choose you right back." They got married that spring. It was a small affair in the church with just Grace and Beatrice as their witnesses. There was no big party, just simple vows said in front of the folks who meant the most. Ruby wore a light blue dress that Bea had helped her sew. It was practical, with pockets big enough for her medical tools because even on her wedding day, she knew someone might need her help. When the preacher asked if she took Finn to be her husband, Ruby's voice was clear when she said, "I do." And when Finn put that ring on her finger a second time, making it all official, Ruby felt something shift deep inside her. It was not healing. The wounds were too deep for that. It was more like acceptance, the understanding that she could hold on to grief and joy at the same time, that she could honor the dead while making a choice to live. They did not take a honeymoon trip. There was work that needed doing, patients to look after, and a ranch to run. Life just kept on with its everyday pace. But at night, in the house they shared now, Ruby would lie next to Finn and feel a way she had not felt since before Catherine was gone. Safe. It was not a perfect kind of safe because the world is still a dangerous place. People still passed on. Sadness still found its way into the quiet moments. But it was safe enough to get some rest. Safe enough to put down her guns once in a while. Safe enough to think about a future that was more than just the next hunt. This was not the ending she had pictured all those 10 years she was on the chase. There was no big victory, no feeling of satisfaction, just the quiet, steady business of living. But it was real, and it was hers. And in the end, that was truly enough. That was the final truth of it all. Ruby never stopped missing Catherine. The grief just became a part of her, a steady companion that walked alongside her through the years. Some days it felt heavier than others. And on some days she could almost forget it was there. She never did have children of her own. That part of her story was just not meant to be. But she delivered dozens of babies, watched them grow up, and became Aunt Ruby to about half the kids in town. Grace eventually married a quiet carpenter who knew how to make her laugh. They named their first little girl Catherine Ruby, the next generation of survivors. Beatrice ran her general store until she was 80 years old. She passed away peaceful in her sleep. She left everything she had to Grace with a little note that said, "You were the daughter I never got to have." Finn grew old right beside Ruby. His gray hair turned to white. His calloused hands got stiff with arthritis, but his eyes never changed. They were always steady, always there. They had 37 years together. It was not enough, it is never enough, but it was a whole lot more than most people get. When Finn passed on, Ruby did not fall to pieces. The grief was a heavy weight, but she had learned how to carry heavy griefs. She kept on with her practice, kept on helping folks, and kept on living, because that is just what you do. People would ask her sometimes if she regretted those 10 years she spent hunting Victor. They would wonder if she wished she had just let it go, moved on sooner, and found Finn earlier. Ruby always gave them the very same answer. "No, I do not regret a minute of it." Catherine deserved justice. All of his victims deserved justice, and I was the only one willing to give up my life to make sure they got it. But she would also tell them the honest truth about what that justice cost her. It cost me 10 years of my life. It cost me the chance to heal any sooner. It cost me sleep and peace of mind and the ability to trust people easily. Revenge is an expensive thing. Justice costs even more. Was it worth it? Ruby would think on the question. She would think about Catherine, about Alice, about all the others. Yes, it was worth it, but I would not recommend it to anyone. If you can find a way to heal without going on a hunt, you ought to do that instead. Final entry. Ruby Catherine Vale died at 73, peaceful in her sleep in the house she had built. They found her in the morning, lying in her bed with her hands folded over an old photograph. The picture showed two young women in their nurses' uniforms. They were sisters, smiling from a time before the war had changed everything. They buried her right next to Finn under a headstone that said simply, Ruby Catherine Vale, 1846 to 1919. Healer, sister, she chose justice over revenge and life over death. The whole town mourned her. The church was filled to bursting. People shared stories about the birth she had attended, the sicknesses she had cured, and the lives she had saved. Grace stood in front of the grave and laid down some wildflowers, yellow and purple, which were Catherine's colors. "She lived a good life," Grace said quietly to the stone. "That is what mattered in the end." After everyone had left, when the sun finally dropped behind the mountains, Catherine Vale's headstone stood beside her sister's grave. They were finally together again. When you get right down to it, the story was not about revenge. Not really. It was about a woman who refused to let evil have the last word. A woman who hunted a monster for a decade and made him face up to what he did. Who then put away her guns and learned how to heal folks instead of hurting them. It was about choosing to live a full life in a world that had taken so much from her, about building something good out of the rubble of all that grief. That right there was Ruby's real victory. It was not the hanging, and it was not the trial. It was the 37 years she spent after, choosing to build something up instead of tearing things down every single day. Victor Drummond died without anyone to mourn him and was soon forgotten. Ruby Catherine Vale was remembered for generations to come, and in the end, that was all the justice she needed. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.